Welcome to our edition of Cranmer Studies. If the Lord be for us, who can be against us? And we're in the business here of reviewing the Act of Pardon for the Clergy, 1531, a move by Cranmer to exert greater control over the church, or Henry. And if there's any, it's very legalized. But it begins to show the laity have jurisdiction over the clergy and not the other way around. Lay control of the church was an important principle of the Reformation, and this statute of 1531 is the first concrete manifestation of the new movement of the monarchy taking control of the church. So here we are, the king, this would be Henry VIII, our sovereign lord, calling his blessed and most gracious remembrance that his good and loving subjects, the most reverend father in God, the Archbishop of Canterbury, that would be William Warham at this point, and other bishops, suffragans, and prelates, and other spiritual persons in the province of the Archbishopric of Canterbury of this realm of England, and the ministers underwritten. It's a very legalized issue that went through the Parliament, which have exercised, practiced, or executed in spiritual courts and other spiritual jurisdictions within the said realm. Now, they're still attached to Rome at this point. This is before the break. That will come in 1534. And other spiritual jurisdictions have fallen and incurred divers dangers of his laws by things done, perpetrated, and contrary to the order of his laws, especially contrary to the form of the statute of provisors, provisions, and praemunera. Henry's dusting off some 14th, 15th century statutes, and His Highness, having a tender eye with mercy and pity and compassion toward his said spiritual subjects, minding of his high goodness and great benignity always to impart the same unto them as justice being daily administered, all rigor excluded, and the great benevolent minds of the said subjects largely and many times approved toward his Highness, especially in their convocation and synod, now presently being in the chapter house of the monastery of Westminster, by correspondence of gratitude to them to be requited of his mere motion, benignity, and liberality, by authority of this his Parliament, and given and granted his liberal and free pardon to his said good, loving subjects, had taken and enjoyed to them and every one of them by virtue of this present act in manner and form ensuing, to wit, the King's Highness of his said benignity and high liberality, in consideration of the said Archbishop, bishops, and clergy of the said province of Canterbury, and in their said convocation now being, have given and granted him a subsidy of £100,000 of lawful money, current in this realm, to be levied and collected by the said clergy at their proper costs and charges, and to be paid in certain form specified in their said grant thereof, is fully and resolutely contented and pleased that it be ordained, established, and enacted by authority of this his said Parliament, that the Reverend Father in God, William Archbishop of Canterbury, Metropolitan and Primate of all England, and other bishops and suffragans, and we'll just call it to an end because it's a long run on legal sentence. The larger picture is the reduction in authority of the primate. We turn now to Prof. Hughes on preaching and worship in his book, The English Reformation. It was necessary further that the services of the church, which had become encumbered and complicated with a multiplicity of regulations, should be simplified and set free from everything that hindered the spontaneous approach to God in prayer and praise. The desirability of having certain rules for the proper ordering of public worship was, of course, admitted. Paul's clear injunction that everything should be done decently and in order. 1 Corinthians 14:40. The rules now proposed, however, were in contrast to those they were replacing, few in number, plain and easily to be understood. The Book of Common Prayer is introduced as an order for prayer and for the reading of Scripture, much reasonable to the mind and purpose of the old fathers, and a great deal more profitable and commodious than that which was of late used. The reason for it being more profitable is that there is here left out many things, whereof some are untrue, some uncertain, some vain, some superstitious. And nothing is ordained to be read but the very pure word of God, the Holy Scriptures, or that which is agreeable to the same, and in such a language and order as is most easy and plain for the understanding both of the readers and hearers. It is more commodious for the shortness thereof, and for the plainness of the order, and for the rules be few and easy. In explaining why some ceremonies were abolished and some reprinted, it's pointed out that the great excess and multitude of ceremonies hath increased in these latter days, that the burden of them is intolerable. The complaint of Augustine in his day, more than 1,000 years previously, is cited, to the effect that ceremonies had grown to such a number that the estate of the Christian people was worse concerning the matter than were the Jews. Augustine had counseled that such yoke and burden be taken away. But it is asked, what would St. Augustine have said if he had seen the ceremonies of the last days used among us, whereunto the multitude used in this time was not to be compared? The excess of ceremonies in the years prior to the Reformation was so great, and many of them so dark, that they did confound and darken than declare and set forth Christ's benefits unto us. The reformers could be content only with those ceremonies which do serve a decent order and godly discipline. Accordingly, quote, the most weighty cause of the abolishment of some ceremonies was that they were so far abused, partly by the superstitious blindness of the rude and unlearned, and partly by the insatiable avarice of such as sought more than their own lucre than the glory of God, that the abuses could not well be taken away, the thing remaining still. We shift to Thomas Cranmer, Margot Johnson on music and liturgy. John Murbuck, the Book of Common Prayer, noted, was printed in 1550 by Richard Grafton, the king's printer. But whether or not this implies official recognition is a matter for debate. The simple music is adapted from plain song to suit the New English words, following the custom for every syllable a note. As in 1549 prayer book itself, it is clearly intended that the priest and the clerk shall sing rather than the congregation. In a short preface, Murbeck sets out the notes he has used and their values. Here we quote, in this book is contained so much of the order of common prayer as is to be sung in churches, wherein are used only these four sorts of notes. The first note is the streny note and is a brew. The second, a square note, and is a semi-brew. The third, a psych, and is a minimi, where there is a prick by the square note. The prick is half as much as the note that goeth before it. The pick was so called because of its shape like a pike head, and the prick is a point which became the dot in modern notation. Merbeck used the customary black notation for the staves of 4 lines. The C clef was used in various positions at the beginning of each stave, and the F clef was an occasional variant when a flat was needed in the signature. For example, in the Kyrie and the Creed, it was printed without a clef in the top space of the nave. By these means he obtained variety. The priest was to intone the preface and the special prefaces in C. The prayer for the church and the prayers following, including the consecration prayer, were to be intoned on A, modulating on the closing words before the Lord's Prayer to almost the key of G, followed by the opening words of Our Father on B natural. As in other Tudor church music, there are no bar lines, but Merbeck inserted a single bar line after each of the 3 parts of the Kyrie and the Sanctus Benedictus in Agnus Dei. Techno mumbo jumbo on music in Cranmer's time. Now we pick up with Prof. McCulloch and what's going on at Canterbury Cathedral. Salvaging the cause. Cranmer had mixed feelings about what was going on. His relationship with the Canterbury Cathedral Priory, of which he was an extremely nominal head, had been frosty. His rapport with Prior Goldwell was non-existent from the start, thanks to the Elizabeth Barton affair. It had not improved, as Goldwell sadly acknowledged to Cromwell when trying unsuccessfully to position himself for a high office in the remodeled cathedral. Cranmer was not so good lord unto me as I would that he were. The Archbishop might be expected to view with satisfaction the dispatch of Goldwell and his black-cowled crew. The trouble was that Henry's schemes for his cathedrals inspired very different notions of the future among churchmen and leading lay people, depending on their religious outlook. Bishop Gardiner's blueprints for the details of the cathedral remodelings made provision for staffing based on the traditional vision of cathedrals as powerhouses of prayer and beautiful music, a vision which paradoxically survived to become a vital part of the Anglican ethos against all the odds of the Reformation. In this respect, Cranmer was far from being an Anglican. What appealed to him and to other evangelicals in Henry's expansive plans was the potential benefit to education in the new foundations, whose collegiate character indeed made them very much like colleges of the universities. He was therefore not impressed when Cromwell forwarded him a draft for the new Canterbury Foundation in November 1539. There was too much money set aside for 12 prebendaries, a species of clergyman who in his eyes were neither a learner nor teacher, but a good viander. He considered that the mere state of a prebendary had ruined the academic promise of many learned men. Prebendaries should be completely abolished, and 20 divines at £10 apiece could instead be supported at the cathedral, together with 40 students in the tongues and sciences, to take advantage of 3 proposed lectures in Greek, Hebrew, and Latin, who were intended to cover theology and literature. What he was proposing was indeed a full-scale university college in a new setting with a biblical humanist curriculum. It was not surprising that he recommended someone from Oxford or Cambridge as the head of the institution, and in particular Dr. Edward Crome, doubly qualified since he was a very successful former head of house at Cambridge. And also, although Cranmer did not say this in his letter, one of the few people to speak out publicly against the Act of 6 Articles. And now for Arthur Innes. Affairs on the continent. The actual effect of what Henry avoided by not avoided joining the Lutheran League, while he carried out his own policy of emphasizing the national character of the Church of England and the personal profits to the sovereign derivable from such a national institution. Cranmer dreamed perpetually of a united Protestant church. Cromwell dreamed of an anti-papal and anti-imperial league with England at its head. Henry dreamed of neither the one nor the other. His theological vanity prevented him from leaning toward Lutheran heresies, and his political theory did not incline him to become a member of a confederation, which would certainly endeavor to control instead of being controlled by him. Thus, when the Lutherans sent over a deputation in the hope of persuading Henry and Cranmer, in effect, to accept the Augsburg Confession, the king treated them with very scant courtesy and expressed his anti-Lutheran sentiments next year in the 6 Articles Act. Cromwell's, whose schemes had done more with princes than with divines, offered no opposition, but was sufficiently enamored of his political project to negotiate the Cleves marriage, entirely with a view to consolidating a Protestant alliance. The project cost him his head and did not ultimately assist the alliance. In fact, events on the continent between 1530 and 1560 influenced the course of affairs in England, for the most part negatively or indirectly, not positively or directly. Yet the whole process of change was one intellectual movement, and that affairs in Europe cannot be ignored without introducing erroneous ideas into the history of the isolated country. Now for Leslie Williams' emblem of faith untouched. And we are where 1537, shortly after the bishops finished their book, the Bishop's Book. That summer, 1537, Henry licensed the publication of an English Bible. Cromwell and Cranmer both deserve credit for this feat, though most sources agree that Cromwell was the instigator and Cranmer the cheerleader. Henry had declared officially in 1530 that an English translation was unnecessary because the people could learn what they needed from preachers, although he said he might consider an English translation expedient at a later date. To ease the king into allowing an English Bible to be published in the December convocation of 1534, Cranmer made 2 proposals. The first petition asked the king to choose talented and reliable divines to start on an English translation, and the second asked him to confiscate all heretical books by William Tyndale, whose illegal translations and his accompanying notes threatened Henry's established and traditional view of Scripture. Tyndale was a native Englishman from Gloucestershire who'd studied at Oxford and Cambridge before moving to Germany and then to Antwerp, where he translated and semi-revised the New Testament and parts of the Old. Tyndale's prologues and marginal notes caused an uproar. For instance, the text against "How shall I curse God whom I curseth not?" Tyndale wrote, "The Pope can tell you how." And Tyndale's response to "meddle with your own business" is a good lesson for monks and idle friars. In 1536, Tyndale was strangled first and then burned at the stake in Antwerp for his heretical views. His last words were, "Lord, open the eyes of the King of England." Tyndale's translation used clear and straightforward English and went back to the original Greek and Hebrew. His New Testament shocked people who hadn't separated what was in the Bible from church practice. Since most people couldn't read the Bible, they assumed Jesus had endowed the church with all the medieval Roman rites and tradition. In his petition to the king, Cranmer wanted an English translation and a good one, but thought the king would be more inclined to allow an English Bible not associated with Tyndale. Cromwell acted immediately and encouraged Miles Coverdale, Bishop of Exeter, to produce an English translation, which was published in Zurich, not England, in October 1535. Derived mostly from Luther's translation of the Vulgate, called Coverdale's inferior translation made no claim to original scholarship. In his injunctions for the enforcement of the 10 Articles, Cromwell mandated that an English Bible be in the churches by the summer of 1537, and it looked for a while as if Coverdale's Bible would be the first authorized for sale in England. We turn our attention to Paul Aris's Thomas Cranmer and popular religion. His actions with respect to popular religious observance over the next year reflect the worry and point in two conflicting directions. This is Eamon Duffy. In September of the same year, he and fellow counselors issued, in the name of the 9-year-old Edward VI, a set of injunctions regulating worship in England. Among other things, they attacked all those who persisted in superstition. Quote, "in casting holy water upon his bed, upon images and other dead things, or bearing about him holy water, or St. John's Gospel, or making crosses of wood on Palm Sunday in time for the reading of the Passion, or keeping of private holy days as bakers, brewers, smiths, and shoemakers, and such others do, or ringing of holy bells, etc., etc." The same injunctions ordered the abolition of all candles and lamps in the churches, except 2 on the high altar, and the destruction of all shrines and paintings of fainted miracles, pilgrimages, idolatry, and superstition, so that there remain no memory of the same in walls, glass windows, or elsewhere in their churches or house. They abolished the immoral custom of the parish procession with the sprinkling of holy water, which preceded the main mass every Sunday and holy day, and which was a distinctive feature of the Sarum liturgy. Yet the injunctions of 1547 preserved a notional continuity with the past by maintaining the traditional ceremonies were tolerable except where superstitiously abused. For all the draconian reductionism, the injunctions could thus appear as a part of a broadly Erasmian program of reform and reorganization, removal of abuses and excessive complexity with an essentially traditional framework, which had characterized the Henrician Reformation, at least as it had affected the parishes. The Henrician royal injunctions of 1538 had ordered the removal of feigned images, which had been abused with superstitious honor, and the extinction of all lamps and lights in churches, except those associated with the sacrament or on the rood loft. Just which images could be described as abused was, of course, a matter of dispute, and religious radicals, including Cranmer himself, will interpret this provision as a mandate for the removal of any image. Protestants had been even more delighted by the regime's propagandist public destruction of the famous pilgrimage images like the Rood of Boxley and the destruction of shrines like that of Becket at Canterbury. In addition, the Henrician regime had also attacked the traditional ritual year by reducing the number of feast and fasting days. Cranmer was almost certainly the moving force behind these measures and sought vigorously to enforce them directly within his own jurisdiction and by the exercise of patronage to influence. He met with determined resistance. Hi, Mary. Yay, Cranmer. Yeah, got a little Cranmer in before I retire for the night. And complained bitterly that the whole diocese was very obstinately given to observe and keep with solemnity the holy days lately abrogated. So this is Eamon Duffy, a Roman Catholic scholar, writing about Cranmer, holy days, images, shrines. Now we shift to Jasper Ridley's Thomas Cranmer, and I just forget where we left. We're Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of Henry. And she's been implicated and accused of adultery. Cranmer was involved in the disgraceful transactions in the case of Catherine Howard. Apart from assisting in the illegal use of torture in examinations, which they used, which was now so common as to be hardly an irregularity, he was responsible on the 12th of November at Hampton Court for suppressing all reference to the pre-contract on the grounds that it would assist in her defense. In this matter, Cranmer acted on the direct orders of the council. Another time when Cranmer is compromised. The criticism which has been most frequently leveled against Cranmer is that he deceived Catherine into making a confession by falsely promising her a pardon. In fact, however, Cranmer, who in this matter was also acting under instructions, offered the pardon unconditionally before the confession was made, and not as a reward for the confession. Nor was the pardon offered in bad faith, for at that time Henry had not discovered that Catherine had been unfaithful after her marriage, as well as promiscuous before it. And the pardon was promised only in respect of her premarital incontinency In any case, Catherine would ultimately have confessed, even if she had not been granted a pardon, for her whole object was to save herself by throwing all of the blame on her lovers. Cranmer's actions followed inevitably from the fact of his position and of his belief in the doctrine of Christian obedience, that is, bow down to the king. His belief that it was his duty as a Christian to be the loyal servant of a king like Henry VIII. Throughout the entire episode of Catherine Howard, the fifth wife, Cranmer was motivated solely by his duty to the king. Lascelles may have acted from religious prejudice in denouncing Catherine, but this is certainly not true of Cranmer. Cranmer made no attempt to derive any advantage for the reformers from an exceptionally favorable situation. The adulterous queen was Norfolk's niece and had often met Henry in the weeks before their marriage at parties at Gardner's house. Her misconduct first came to light while Norfolk, Brown, and Wriothesley were in the north with Henry, and Gardner was traveling home from Ratisbon, while Cranmer, Audley, and Hertford were allegedly members of the Protestant faction of the council, were the only councillors of the first rank who remained in London. This was an opportunity for a daring and unscrupulous Protestant leader to induce some of the ladies of the Duchess of Norfolk's household to accuse the Duke and Gardner, as well as the Duchess, of having known about Catherine's immoral life when they contrived to have her marry the king in the first place. But Cranmer obviously never even contemplated such a step. He prosecuted the case against Catherine Howard, not because she represented the conservative interest, but because it was his duty to God and the king to expose the adultery of his sovereign's consort. I'm still not sure she even committed post-marital adultery, but she confessed to pre-marital engagements. So we'll bring this to a close. If the Lord be for us, who can be against us? Good to see you, Mary, and I'm getting ready to retire here and watch this program on the January 6th hearings. We'll see you later. Good to see you and talk to you today. Godspeed.